Yeah, so this here was the site of the Amber's Lounge, which used to have jam night on Sunday nights. And one Sunday, Bruce and I wandered in here, and I saw these three scruffy-looking punk rockers. It's probably 1978, might have been 77, I don't remember. I've never seen a real punk rocker before. I saw these three scruffy guys here, and they got up on stage and played, and I found out later their name was the Automatic Fathers. So months later, we had a sign up in Music Sound World looking for people to start a punk rock band. I get this call from this guy Michael, and we're talking to him about different stuff, and he's asking me, are you guys the real thing? And of course we thought we were at the time, but talked to him a little bit more, and turns out he said, yeah, my band's the Automatic Fathers. And I said, dude, I've seen your act. He said, it ain't no act.
First time I ever encountered Mike playing basketball, you know, Haskell against Northeast, and I was guarding this big tall guy. I mean, in sixth grade, he was already 6 feet tall, but me being, you know, half Neanderthal, I got long arms, so he was trying to throw an inbound pass, and I was guarding him, you know. He was having a hard time, so he said, hey, he looked at it and said, your foot's across the line. So I looked down, he threw the ball right past me. That was the first time I remember ever seeing him. It was like that summer between 7th and 8th grade, you know, I started going over to his house. He already had an electric guitar and amp and was, you know, playing it. As far as I could tell, he played it pretty good. And I traded him some records for an acoustic. I started learning how to play a little bit. And by the next summer, we were deciding that we were going to have a band. We needed a drummer, like always. It wasn't too long after that we started writing, you know. We called ourselves Severed Flesh. And the first song I wrote was called Wasted Bodies, Burning in Hell.
You and I went over to their house over there in Broken Arrow, and he and the Automatic Fathers were playing, and we went in there and did a couple songs for them, and so then that was like the beginning, and you know, we were pretty much friends ever after that.
When I'd been hearing about this band from my kid brother, who was also a Brian, and Brian Plummer, and so they were like, oh yeah, these guys, they're like a real rock band and blah, blah, blah. So we booked a thing at a rec center somewhere. It was a Saturday, hotter than hell, in a gymnasium, and there was like 20 people there. And we played, and so then they did a little set, and so it was Michael and David Holland and Brian Holland on drums, and he was like, a little kid. They were just starting out, and they were like real serious about it. I mean, Michael and David were really trying to be a band, a real band. So then that was probably 76 or 7, I guess. And then the next time I saw them, they had become the Automatic Fathers. And by then they had gotten a whole lot better, and they'd written a couple of their own songs, legendary, their big Silver Bullet, Boy from the 50s.
Well, I started that one out with the little robotic riff, and then the first verse. And Mike pretty much took it over after that.
Michael was the first one I heard of, did his own material. And, that really impressed me. I really liked the original music part of it. Because if you want to hear somebody else's songs, you just go to the radio and play the records, But the original material is what I was really interested in. The creating part of it. The first time I saw him was on the other side of Manford. It was pretty good. The boys from the 50s and all that was, pretty exciting stuff.
Mikel Automatic was actually the first person I ever met in the scene. Scott Miller and I were at the Cain's Ballroom. I don't remember who was playing, but when we walked in, there was two guys running around putting posters out on tables. And Scott went and grabbed one of the posters, and it was the classic punk rock ransom note style of graphics. So we knew it must be a cool gig, right? But when I asked the guy about it, and it was Mike, and he said, yeah, there's this old beer joint down on Main that is allowing bands to play, and it's got weird stuff hanging from the ceiling and all this. And by God, we were down there the next day trying to book a gig.
Roger and I and Brian Plummer, I think, played the Rooster Day at like 10 in the morning. There was nobody there. And somebody, Brian Holland, I think, said, hey, let's go to the library. And there was electricity we could tap into there. So we plugged all the equipment up and set up and played there. We might have got run off of Rooster Day. I can't remember why we kind of left the main drag. But we set up and we played out there on the lawn of the Broken Arrow Library. Mike was there, David Holland. We played anywhere. If we heard of a jam night, we would show up and pretend it was a show, And if the people liked it or not, it didn't matter. If our girlfriends were there, they liked it. And
Anthony showed up with Michael at my house at 6th and Peoria. They had I think he'd been out seeing the Automatic Fathers, and Fathers are just splitting up. So he brought him over to see me. We all met. Suddenly there was Joe Danger. Suddenly there was David Bass, and then we had a band. So we had to take all the furniture out of my living room because we had a band. And it worked, we all just gelled right off immediately. Michael and I had a rhythm thing and a groove that was just ours. It just didn't really work with everybody else, but it was ours. And we really enjoyed playing together. Michael and I both had something in common. We play. We didn't care if it was for money, just as long as we got some free beer. But we just wanted to play. And it was a creative thing that was going on. He had some songs. Anthony wrote some songs. I was writing some songs. Joe had a whole stack of stuff. So we just threw it all out at each other. And it didn't take long for a song to gel. Michael had a knack and some interesting chord changes. Green burritos too. I'll never forget green burritos from Mike. We were that starving band.
Yeah.
So we'd get out and walk the sidewalk from 6th and Peoria to about 11th Street where New Totem was. That was dinner for the day. It was green burritos out of the microwave.
I met Michael at the 6th and Peoria house because he was in that layer of band guys over there, and I just liked watching them play and rehearse there at the house, and they smoked a lot of doob too, but bring a beer over, and it was like a free show. And you got to sit on the couch, you didn't have to go into and pay a cover fee to go see him play. So I got to know him like that. And plus, my roommate was still involved with one of the players. And so it was we'd go over there together, and that's how I got to know Mike. And one night, I needed a ride home because I think I had a ride over there with my roommate, but they were going to go somewhere. And so Mike said, he'd take me home, but he needed to stop and get gas. So we stopped at the gas station, and he came back out. He went in to pay and came back out, and he bought this. Okay, he didn't buy it. I'm sure he just had a thought about it. And he came back with one of those giant candy bars, and he gave it to me. And I was hooked right there. I was very interested right there. I was like, huh, this guy stole a candy bar for me. He must be pretty special.
Actually, the first band I ever saw in Tulsa, I think, was the Jacks. They were playing down on Boston somewhere down there. Second time I went out to the Crystal Pistol. And NOTA weren't playing. Jack Riley and the Associates were playing the first time around. The second time I went there, NOTA were playing, and that's where I first saw Mike. You couldn't really miss Mike. Mike was sort of this giant giraffe-like figure, and I believe at that time he had his hair dyed completely jet black, as I seem to remember. So there was this, he looked like perhaps an Addams Family character, this giant sort of tall thing with the black hair. And I got to know him a little bit there. He was probably, I think, already playing, I think the Automatic Fathers were over by then. I think he was playing in the New Mysterians, that's right, because not long after I first brought my 4-track down there to record NOTA, Mike asked if he could borrow the 4-track. So the New Mysterians could cut a demo, and I said, sure, come around to the apartment and get it. And I remember, so I'm sitting in my little apartment on 8th Street, and it's a knock on the door, and in comes Michael, and sort of grunts a little bit, doesn't speak much, takes the 4-track, and my wife looked at me and said, you'll never see that again.
Mike comes from the humblest of beginnings, and his mom was trying to get on this government program. It's kind of like Habitat for Humanity now. It was called the 235 program back in the 70s. And they were doing a housing project down in Coweta. And so, she was trying to get in on that. And for some reason, they turned her down. They declined her. So that's kind of where that came from. We were all pissed off about that because they let her on for like a month, actually let her go out and look at a house and shit.
I'm trying to get my mom on a 235, but they don't care if we live or die. They said to qualify that we gotta be broke, so I quit my job and I still do the snow.
I grew up in the same neighborhood as Roger Scott, and we hung out together, got into trouble together, and created mayhem around town together. And he was, he was in the same things that I was, and he's the one that introduced me to Michael and the Jacks. And we heard about this band in Broken Arrow that played at Rooster Days. I thought it was pretty cool that somebody played their original music at the Rooster Days. And I'm not sure when I was formally introduced. I think it was like 78, late 78, early 79. The Automatic Fathers played at this bar on the other side of Manford. They had found somebody that's stupid enough to let them play. And we got a whole bunch of people together, like maybe 20 people, to drive out to Manford to see the Automatic Fathers. And that's how desperate we were to, see original music. I could have stayed in town and seen Jim's Weenie, That was the first time I saw Michael play. It's Michael and David and Brian.
It was a very exciting time that kind of music was kind of ruling our world, and it was fresh and it was new, and these bands started coming into Tulsa with that sound, and everybody was fired up about it. And that's kind of what we got fired up about. And about it within a year, we had decided we were gonna maybe try to trek it out to Los Angeles and do it. But what we did is we went out there first to kind of look to see what it was like, and we actually went out there with another band. We chased another band out there and played with them. We went out there and kind of got a little lay of the ground. We stayed out there for about a month and decided, yeah, we wanted to do that. And so we came back, and Mike went back out there because he wanted to find a place. Meanwhile, I'm back in Tulsa, kind of getting things tied up in Tulsa to close down, you know, where I was living and my job and everything, and adios to my family because they thought I was nuts. I'm moving out to LA without a job with a punk rocker, you know. And I remember we went to, Mike's father was living at that time down in some very teeny tiny town in Arkansas, and it was not pleasant. But he wanted to help us, and he had this really old rickety. You could tow it on the back of your car. He thought, oh, we could use that as our moving vehicle. Except it had a ton of wasps had made nests in there, and so when we went to Arkansas and saw it, I was like, oh no, I don't want any part of that. But no, Mike said, yeah, he can make that work. He can make that work. And he opened the flaps on the back, and we drove back to Tulsa, and all of the wasps we left him in Arkansas as we're flying down there. So we got back to Tulsa, loaded that up, and head out to LA and started our LA life out there. And I'm gonna tell you, it was a very different life. It was fun.
Yeah, just a few weeks before Mike passed, we went to Music Sound World. And we were in the car driving over there, and I just said something to Michael just offhand. I wonder why Randy Jeanette has always been such a big dick. So we went into Music Sound World, and that was the first, Mike went over, that was the first thing he said, Randy, why have you always been such a big dick? You know, Randy, like, you know, I don't think many people said that to him, so he was, but that was, you know, that was Michael.
Michael's setup was really unique because it was like really super punk. I mean, it was the definition of a punk setup. It was an ovation preacher. You remember those things? It was just like this hideous guitar. And you couldn't, I mean, they played like crap, but he was playing it through a Vox Super Beetle. And it just worked. I mean, it was like louder than hell. And, you know, the amp was huge and buzzed like crazy because they had some fluorescent lighting in there anyway. So Sunday afternoon, just whole thing. And then they did, you know, Boy from the 50s. And I was like, we were just completely knocked out. I mean, we were blown away because it's like, if they'd released that in London, that would have been a hit.
So was there a sense with you guys of feeling like you were way out of place down there in Broken Arrow and Oklahoma?
You think? Do you really think? I see Dwayne, he was a little older than us, and he got a car. And of course, we drug Maine like everybody else. And our favorite pastime was running away from pickups full of rednecks who wanted to pull us out, beat us up, and cut our hair. Which they never actually succeeded in that. They followed us all the way back to Mike's house one time. This was right around the 4th of July. Of course, they're yelling at us out the windows of their truck, and he just walked up with like this big brick of firecrackers. They didn't see it. Of course, they were, you know, we're gonna catch you motherfuckers and cut your hair, you know, whatever. He just lit it and threw it in the truck with them. And they all wound up bailing out, and the truck's idling down the street without a driver. I mean, those firecrackers went off for a good, 2 or 3 minutes.
Did you guys think you were wasting your time playing music that nobody wanted to hear?
No. Just like you, just like everybody here, we saw the Sex Pistols, and that just changed every fucking thing. Up till then, we were trying to, I don't know, be some version of some theatrical, heavy metal rock, whatever, which we were really ill-equipped for. We saw the Pistols, and it's like, wow, we can already do that,
Yeah.
So no, we weren't wasting our time. We were.
That's why you see the camaraderie today, and why there's still this love for Mike. It's because of his spirit. You talk about a pure rock and roll spirit. I don't think he ever did it for the money. I don't think any of us did it for the money. But I think that energy is still alive today, and it's still respected, because it's powerful and pure.
Then the last time I saw Michael play, I think, was at the Blue Grotto. They when the new Mysterians premiered, and so I remember going, and I was standing around with Jerry Casey, and we were pretty intimidated because here they'd gone from little high school guys to Ramones thing, and all of a sudden Michael's like they looked like they were 7 feet tall, but they were scary Frankenstein guys, and you had Jim Eason and Michael, who were really looming over. The place was so small, you were just like that far from the band.
We were out there, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 5 years, because we went out there, and then a year later we got married out there. And then a year later, we had a baby. And that kind of tapered off after we had a baby, the amount of music we were doing. So we were trying to more or less concentrate at that point to record. And we had bought a home out there. We bought our first home out there. And so how we came back to Tulsa is a very unusual story. Is that we were watching the World Series, and there was a knock on our door, and we'd only lived in our house probably 2 years. It was a newer home, and a knock on our door, and this real estate lady was there. We're like, yeah, and she goes, I have a buyer for your house. Our house was not for sale. We didn't have it listed. It was like, what? She said we had an hour to decide, or she was going to go to the next one. And we're like, what? This is like, we're thinking we're getting scammed or something, and we're missing the game. we were watching the World Series. So we told her to come back in an hour, and she did. And we decided, well, let's go ahead and go back to Tulsa, because we could essentially pursue recording in Tulsa, and be near our families, because now we had a child, and we came back to Tulsa and didn't have any jobs or anything, but we had some money because, we made a good deal on our house. So that's how we came back to Tulsa.
I didn't really get to know him until after he and Mary came back. He and Jeff, Brian Crane, me put together a band that was going to rehearse in my basement, which was a minor problem because both Jeff and Mike were like ungodly tall, and the basement had a ceiling that I think was 6'1". So we ended up digging a hole all the way around the basement, about maybe 6 by 6, and dropping it about a foot and putting concrete in it so that Jeff and Mike could stand up straight in this thing. I remember once, to Mike's disgust, I brought in, it must have been a fairly early one, a MIDI guitar, where you could play the strings and set it into a keyboard, and I had set it up to this angelic voice sound or something. And you played the strings, and I said, "Hey Mike, try this, play something pretty on it." So I give it to Mike, and he plays the intro to Search and Destroy on it with the angel voices. And I was like, Mike said something pretty. Mike said, "That was pretty." That was Mike all over. That was what he did.
At the end of his life, he and I had gotten back together just a few months before he passed away, and he was really concerned about his musical legacy. Was it going to be preserved, because he didn't have any vinyl? But it was a shock though when he passed, because we'd been hanging out together, and he had spent a bunch of money, got Pro Tools on his computer and all that, and he had plans, for the future, and the future just didn't happen.
We really didn't have good usable Automatic Fathers songs. Everything we had sounded like it was recorded on a ghetto blaster that was under a pile of coats at the time. It was just really not usable.
These songs, this is the first time they've ever been recorded on anything beyond a ghetto blaster.
Yeah, the only recording that I know of for sure of the Automatic Fathers is a recording that I made of them on a TX 4-track, big reel-to-reel thing. And of course we had that, and we had a Tapco mixer, which was 6 channels, just a piece of crap PA mixer. And then I think we had one mic that might have been an SM57, an actual Shure mic, and the other one was a realistic with a 1/4-inch jack on it. Not the XLR plug or whatever they're called. They was the actual 1/4-inch high impedance, just shit mic. And I think we recorded the band with we recorded the Automatic Fathers.
Then we'd see Mike occasionally, just socially, but I didn't have that much contact with him again. And until 2006, where I spent a year living in Berkeley, California, because I was doing a master's in law. And Susie stayed back here, and she was telling me that Mike was kind of sick and in the hospital, and they really didn't know what was going on. And I flew back a couple of days before Christmas Eve from Berkeley. I said, "We better go up and see Mike tomorrow. I think he'd like to see you." And I remember we went up there, and Susie said, "I better go in the room first, check if he's okay to see visitors." And she came out looking very pale, and I said, "Sort of what?" And she said, "Mike just died." Just like that. I never did get to speak to him again, which, to this day sort of bothers me a little bit, If I'd have gone up the previous day, you know, I'd landed, he might have still been there. But it was just a huge shock to everyone. You know, he seemed indestructible. You know, Michael was a guy that could drink an entire bottle of whiskey and then go out and play. It didn't seem that anything could really harm him, you know. But yeah, that was it, and you know, we've kind of missed him ever since.